want to start this video by saying that I am making it with complete sincerity. This is not a catty, dismissive, contemptuous video. I am not having fun insulting the famous name of Sam Harris in this video. It's really with kind of sadness and shock that I discovered what complete garbage this book is. And it's with no joy in my heart that I'm sitting here reporting to the internet what complete garbage this book is. My expectations coming to this book, apart from the fact that I spent more than 10 years of my life as a scholar of Buddhism, and especially of Theravada Buddhism, the form of Buddhism that Sam Harris is invoking. I saw Sam Harris's work on the internet. I saw short articles he had written, most of them directly or indirectly promoting this book. But articles he wrote expressing his views about meditation, Buddhism, about the possible role of spirituality under this heading within an atheist worldview. Those short articles are better than this book. Having read those articles and having heard his views, I think in his own monologues and his own interviews, this kind of thing, I wasn't expecting this book to be good, but I was expecting it to be better than what I had already seen on the internet. And it's not. This book is terrible. From cover to cover, it's complete garbage. And if you don't know anything about Buddhism, if you're completely ignorant about Buddhism, I'm very sorry that it's going to fundamentally mislead you. If you do have a prior background in Buddhism, I think you would just find it impossible to read. Again, when I first heard about this book, I was expecting a certain kind of academic response, positive, negative, evaluative, or otherwise. So I actually looked it up in the the library database here, looking for articles responding to it. I would have expected some scholar of Buddhist philosophy or what have you to have engaged with this book. All kinds of pop psychology books dealing with Buddhism, all kinds of scientistic books popularizing Buddhism do get some kind of treatment in that sense, even if it's just a book review. Now, while this book is famous enough, because the author is a famous guy, that it had reviews in the New York Times and mainstream newspapers, I was stunned by the complete silence in that sort of academic press. Now, when this book arrived on my desk, because I had to order it from another library, only when I picked it up and looked at the text did I understand why it had been ignored. And just looking at it, just flipping through it in the first couple of seconds of holding the book, you can see this is a book that is impossible to take seriously. Now, that does not come as a surprise because his articles on the internet were good or wonderful. They're not. They're terrible in their own way. Maybe I'll say a little bit more about that. But if you want to engage in a critique of Sam Harris's view on Buddhism, meditation, etc., use the articles, the short articles he posts on the internet. This book is amazingly adapted from a PhD thesis. If you know anything about academic publishing, a certain level of respect is accorded to almost any book that is taken from a PhD thesis. In this case, a PhD thesis at a major Western university by a major famous author. By default, it'll be taken pretty seriously. But everything about this book is impossible to take seriously. It's incredibly poorly written, incredibly poorly sourced. It demonstrates just an embarrassing level of ignorance of Buddhism. And, like many true believers, he's self-righteous in his ignorance. He just cites the expertise of his favorite white guru from California completely uncritically. At one point here, he makes what to me is an embarrassing contrast between what he values in the Theravada Buddhist religion and written canon to his dismissive and contemptuous attitude towards Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. He says here of a particular sutta. So sutta is a short text within the Pali Canon. This sutta is not a collection of ancient myths, superstitions, and taboos. It is a rigorously empirical guide to freeing the mind from suffering. The stuff he chooses to address within Buddhism, there's a huge literature in English on sort of every word, every key term, every stage, every twist in the road he chooses to go down, and he ignores it, beginning to end. He learns nothing from the work of other scholars from the last 150 years, whatever you want to say. And again, this is in English. Sam Harris can read English. If it was written by someone whose only language were Lithuanian, I would sympathize. And believe me, in a small country like Laos, if you talk about people whose only language is Laotian, you have to sympathize to some extent. Their ability to know anything about Buddhism may be really crippled because they have so much trouble accessing modern scholarship and so on. Even Chinese. I mean, if your first language is Chinese and you want to be a scholar of Buddhism, now you have to learn a European language like English, which is very sad. I've written articles about that. I've made other YouTube videos talking about that. But it reflects how much progress was made in the last 150 years in the study of Buddhism in Europe. And during that same period of 150 years, basically civil war, revolution, and other factors destroyed what could have been a much more productive period of scholarship in China and in other countries in Asia. Sam Harris demonstrates total incompetence in his use of sources. And that includes purely scientific sources about the supposed mental effects of meditation over to religious canonical sources using the religious literature of Buddhism to make his point. And to some extent, I can only explain that in terms of stupidity. When Sam Harris is sitting down and having an interview with Joe Rogan, he may seem intelligent. He may seem exponentially more intelligent than Joe Rogan, than the person who's interviewing him. But both in the articles and in the book dealing with Buddhism, there's a great deal wrong with it for which there is no explanation aside from stupidity. But the second major factor here is ego, is the ego trip this guy is on. My friend Joseph Goldstein, one of the finest Vipassana teachers I know, likens this shift in awareness to the experience of being fully immersed in a film and then suddenly realizing that you were sitting in a theater watching a mere play of light upon the wall. Sam Harris really exhibits some of the ego trip of the true believer in feeling that he has discovered something wonderful that's only accessible to a special few, and that he is sharing this with you. And in a sense, his appeal to authority is his own mystical, really supernatural experience. Now, the funny the funny caveat to add there is just that he insists that this is not supernatural, and that, for example, what he's attained through meditation, or most of what he's attained, one of the crucial experiences, is actually identical to certain types of drug use. He talks a lot about MDMA, about these mind-altering drugs, and how he alleges the real impact or benefit of Theravada Buddhist meditation. And he smears together what should be separate categories of Nibbana and Metabhavana and about his treatment of the source text in Buddhism is 100% incompetent and 100% self-important. He seems to have no concern there. But then claiming that the desideratum, the objective of this meditation in Buddhism, is the same as what you experience through the use of certain mind-altering drugs, party drugs like MDMA, that cause brain damage, incidentally. Anyone sincerely interested in Buddhism as a religion should find that deeply disturbing. It's also false and should be refuted as false. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not a member of the Buddhist religion. But yeah, in a sense, this is both offensive and dangerous. The other people who I think should step up and be offended would be anyone really interested in the situation for neuroscience as a legitimate academic discipline. Because what this book contains, and shockingly it's adapted from a PhD thesis, this shows neuroscience in modern Western academia to be no better than a sort of category of pop psychology with isolated anecdotes drawn from scientific experiments. And I won't get into detail about it here, but in terms of his incompetence with sources, Sam Harris does misrepresent scientific studies that he cites. It's much easier to follow up on that if you're using his articles on the internet, where he gives you a link or a citation, and you can then go to the library and get that source one way or another. And whether it's unintentional or a product of his own intentional bias, he lies to you about really serious flaws in the sources he's citing. My earlier video addressed a completely hilarious study that Sam Harris treats as proof positive, as definitive proof that meditation has these effects on the mind. And again, he's not even really saying the same effect. He's neither saying the same effects that the study showed, nor is he relating these to the effects that actual canonical Theravada Buddhism would be interested in. And then you look at the study, and it's this fishing expedition that engages in moving the goalposts. These are two idioms that we use in English in talking about these problems in scientific research, but we have no other way to express it. Moving the goalposts, meaning you don't really define what it was you were testing for, and then any variation discovered in the test is treated as a significant finding because you're moving the goalposts. You're changing the definition of what would be a significant finding as you go. That study he treated as proof positive, it uses these very dubious metrics, like measuring how angry somebody is through some kind of standardized interview. And then even then, this meditation practice is allegedly going to make you less angry, which, by the way, is not the point of medicine. Is not the point of meditation in Theravada Buddhism. I managed to condense that down to one word there. Medism. It's a useful term. Meditationism. Medism. Yeah, why not? Hashtag medism. And the actual study, what it shows is their control group sat and listened to The Lord of the Rings as a book on tape. And The Lord of the Rings was more effective in reducing anger and achieving these other desiderata than the Buddhist meditation was. Now, there's so many problematic things in that study, but it had more than 24 measurements. So, you're allegedly measuring how angry these people are, how stressed out they are, how much of this, that, and the other psychological characteristic they have before versus after this meditation training. And for the control group, before versus after listening to Lord of the Rings. So they basically got one measurement that seemed to show a significant difference in the meditation group that was not there in the Lord of the Rings group. But just reading the study as a whole, just looking at the list of the quantitative measurements and then the conclusions and the assumptions, and just thinking about what these metrics are and what's being measured and having any basis in Buddhism, it cannot be taken seriously. When I was discussing this with somebody on the internet, they called it cargo cult science. And I said, look, I can't get behind that term because cargo cults get results. Cargo cults, compared to this, they aren't that bad. A cargo cult is a pretty rational, logical religion. It's based on real-world experience. It gets results. It works. It's social. Everyone gets to come out and sing and dance. My expectations were amazingly low before actually laying hands on this book. But I was assuming that Sam Harris was going to make some kind of significant contribution from an atheist perspective, from a skeptical perspective, to either the Western understanding of Buddhism or to a Buddhist reappraisal of neurology or something. And it's not. This book is complete garbage. And this book is proof positive of absolutely nothing aside from the fact that Sam Harris is an idiot.